Hello and welcome everybody back to From the Heart, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to kind of sit out here in the woods. This is actually the area where I used to do my 3D printing videos, and it's been a little while since I just sat down and talked about a book that I read. And this one in particular, Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, is one that is just really stuck with me. About when I very first started this channel and I was just buying comic book after graphic novel after book, just constantly getting about 5 a week, and working in Kalamazoo, Michigan, I found myself kind of a lot of time to read. I would sit down on my breaks and I'd read through the entire thing. And it's really just starting to become a bit of a nostalgic time for me. And I gotta say, I think this is one of those books that is kind of going to stick with me as long as I live, because it's something that just really resonated with me. It's a sci-fi book, but when I say sci-fi, it's not really about the high-tech societies of the future, but it's more about all these different characters through 4 different generations, spanning across a giant amount of time, and how they all kind of intersect. And I think the overall plot in this thing is something that I just find so interesting, and the characters within are just amazing. I think it's a very good, comfy book to kind of sit down, and it's just something that I've been for a long time been wanting to sit down and talk about this, as I've just recently re-listened to it through an audiobook at work, and it just reminded me how much I enjoyed this book when I first read it in the fall time, in the cold air of the night. And I just kind of want to dig into this. Like I said, it's going to span across 4 different generations, and I'm going to be laying out some spoilers here, just fair warning. If any of you kind of want to read this, I very highly recommend it. I would not reach out any farther into this, as I think the overall best part of this is not knowing exactly where this is all leading. It kind of makes your mind go in a bunch of different directions, whether this is maybe about aliens or if this is maybe just kind of about a glitch in the system per se. It's a book that kind of took me a moment to realize exactly where this thing is going. Now, the first chapter of Sea and Tranquility is going to be starting in 1912 with a man named Andrew, and he basically has been sent away from England. He comes from royalty, and after a quaint little dinner party with his parents and kind of letting them know that he thinks colonization and the mere idea of God is just absolutely ridiculous, this man just kind of wants to live a life in peace, and he kind of says this through the different chapters, that maybe just the small things in life could possibly be enough. But when he's sent away from his family for years undescribed by his parents, he begins his journey trying to kind of make a name for himself, journeying through Quebec as all these cities are kind of being developed, and he just wants to maybe find a place for himself, or not. He says he'd be perfectly fine with possibly just a life of solitude. And he kind of just spends his days just picking up flowers, buying things that he shouldn't, like postcards and little trinkets and baubles inside of different shops that he comes across. And while he does meet a couple friends along the way, the overall first chapter of this I find to be, like I said, very comfy. I really enjoyed Andrew's story, and the main plot point of this is eventually, as he gets through all these different societies, just kind of learning about all these different subcultures of Canada, the loggers, the people who are kind of building cities and pulling up shopkeepes and just trying to make a name for themselves in this new world, this new era of planet Earth. And as he continues his journey, he just kind of reaches this small encampment where one of his friends is. His friend is trying to get in with this business with these local people, and Andrew kind of realizes that nothing that this man says or anything is ever going to actually allow him to be here, that maybe he needs to be here for 10 years before these people actually accept that he is one of them, and that he's not just some kind of foreigner, some kind of outsider. And he just begins to kind of realize how funny life is, how funny people are, and sort of how ridiculous all these social constructs around him kind of is. And while this isn't going to make a very big difference in the overall story, it's just something that's very nice to read about, and I think Andrew is probably one of my favorite characters in this. While his story is maybe the slowest, I thought it was just the most peaceful. Alright, I very much enjoyed this. But as he makes his way through the small town, he kind of begins to settle in. He begins meeting all the people, and one day he kind of decides that he is going to go on an adventure. He steps into the woods just a mere 5 or 10 paces, and he realizes that he's only going to take a couple more, and this will be the end of it. He'll go back to his normal life. He'll go back to playing checkers, having drinks with the local people, maybe trying to meet some sort of love interest, and that basically this is going to be the rest of his life. But as he kind of takes the next couple of paces, he sees a giant maple tree in front of him, and he realizes that this seems to be kind of an interesting place, a place that he would maybe like to sit under and kind of contemplate his journey, contemplate his life, how and when he's ever going to see his family again, and he decides to continue. He begins walking through these woods, and suddenly out of nowhere, this priest comes by. This priest, with a very strange accent, kind of begins to ask him all these questions, and while he doesn't find this entirely weird, he has happened upon a new village, and he knows that they do have some sort of chapel. He just kind of converses with this man. And one thing that he notices while talking to this said priest is that he can't really pinpoint his accent. The priest says he's from this certain area, but he doesn't necessarily believe it. He's been to all these different places, and he's never quite heard an accent like this. And as this priest kind of continues to ask him all these different questions, eventually he does leave. He tells Andrew that he's going to leave him to his contemplation and let him kind of continue this nice day that he's having. And when he does leave, Andrew does continue the walk towards the giant maple tree. And this is where kind of the first mystery of this entire book is going to be coming from. As Andrew continues to kind of walk towards this giant tree, just kind of trying to find a little place to rest, a little piece of land that he can call his own for maybe even 10-15 minutes, just a nice enjoyable place where he can kind of think about his life. But as he continues to walk further and further, suddenly his vision goes black and he's hearing all these different noises. He hears a violin off in the distance, and the biggest thing is he kind of hears this noise that he's never heard before. It's just this giant whooshing noise. And these are parts in the book that are going to happen over and over again as you kind of get through it, and you will slowly begin to realize what exactly is happening here. And this is what makes this book so good. It's the overarching mystery that spans across several generations, starting in 1912 and going all the way to 2400. It is something that really kind of blew my mind. It was something that I found extremely enjoyable. And while this is happening to Andrew, his vision is blurred for maybe even a second, maybe two. But finally, he comes back to reality, realizing that he is now away from this giant maple tree. And he's not exactly sure what happened. He thinks that this might be some kind of paranormal event. And when I first read it, I honestly thought that maybe he had just been like abducted or something, that maybe this book had something to do with aliens. But I gotta tell you right now, this is just not the case. And like I said, this is a book that really requires a fresh read. You don't want to be spoiled on any of it. I think it makes it that much better. But if you do decide to continue listening, thank you very much. But as Andrew thinks that he's kind of blacked out, he runs back to the city and he begins to kind of try and find this priest to maybe ask him a couple questions, maybe see if this man actually seen or heard or experienced these events that he has just came across. And he makes his way back to the chapel where he can see that this priest is here, and he begins to kind of ask him all these different questions. And this priest seems to be a little bit in a hurry. He needs to kind of get out of this town, and eventually he does so. And Andrew kind of goes across the city. He begins to ask the town people all these different questions about where this man is from, if any of these people have kind of talked to him, how long he's been in this town. And essentially everybody tells him that this is not the priest of the city, that this man they've never even seen before. And this begins to kind of make Andrew feel like maybe he's a little bit crazy. Maybe all this situation has just been kind of in his head. He even feels like after he's kind of talked to these people about the situations that just happened, that maybe it didn't happen at all, and maybe it's just something that he dreamed, and that maybe he's just kind of losing his mind. And this is basically where chapter 1 is going to end, and we will go all the way into 2020 with two characters known as Morel and Vincent. And where this is going to kind of start is this Morel girl. She goes to this concert, she knows the musician that is going to be there, a man who kind of melds video as well as music all together. And the only reason that she is really here is that she wants to kind of talk to him about where her friend Vincent has been. This woman that used to be in her life, it turns out that their two husbands used to be very well connected. They used to kind of run this business together until fatefully one day they figured out that Vincent's husband has actually been running this giant Ponzi scheme. And while he didn't know, he is basically financially devastated and he's not really able to kind of handle this. And sadly, he does end up killing himself, leaving Morel all alone. This is actually kind of the love of her life, and she kind of explains this throughout, that she's never quite met a person like this, never quite jived like a person like this. And upon all of this happening, Vincent's husband flees the country. And after that, Morel has never really seen her friend Vincent. These people that she spent 2 to 3 years of their lives with, these people just kind of traveling everywhere, having the time of their lives. She said there's money, and that basically these people were very heavily connected. And when this situation happened, everything was broke. And upon hearing that Vincent's brother, the musician, the videographer, would be in the city that she's in, she wants to go maybe ask him where Vincent is, maybe ask him a couple questions about the situations that went down. And this all kind of leads to something strange. She goes into this concert hall and she begins to kind of watch Vincent's brother kind of do his performance. And what he does is he plays the violin over weird kind of video clips. And one of these video clips would happen to be of Vincent as a young teenager just kind of walking through these woods. These people are also from Canada, and it would so happen to be that this is kind kind of the same area that Andrew was in. And in one part of this portion, the music cuts out, and the video kind of also cuts out. And essentially what we hear once again is a strange violin kind of going off in the distance, all these different footsteps, and once again, this giant whooshing noise that nobody has ever quite happened before. The span of events that only takes place over maybe 1 to 2 to 3 seconds, basically the same exact thing that happened to Andrew. And while you think that these stories are completely tied, this is actually more a story about Morel just kind of maybe wanting to confront Vincent about whether or not she knew that this whole business opportunity was something that she knew about, and that eventually led to the fateful ending of her husband's life, and she just kind of needs some closure. And this is just kind of more of a story about that. But with the next couple events, the concert ends, and Morel wants to ask Vincent's brother, the performer, whether he knows where she is at. And upon doing so, she kind of runs up to him in the street, and the strange man kind of comes up at the same time. He begins to ask him all these questions, kind of cutting Morel off about this strange video, these noises that were kind of heard throughout. And it's very strange to Morel that this man would come and basically just cut her off, this strange man who doesn't really seem to care about the performance itself, but rather the weird video glitch that kind of happened for only 2 to 3 seconds. And eventually they kind of all decide to go to this bar. Morel doesn't really want to, but she wants the answers from Vincent's brother, and this man seems very persistent to know more and more about the performance, maybe where the shot was taken from, if this was their childhood home, if any of them have ever experienced this themselves. And this man kind of goes on to let them know that his name is Gasperi Jaquise Roberts. And after the bar scene, and everybody's just so crowded, and Morel really isn't able to get a good answer out of him, she does find out that Vincent is actually now dead. She's deceased. She actually fell off a boat, something that seemed like an accident, and that her husband is yet still away in the country. And Morel never really knew that her old best friend is actually dead, and she begins to tear up, and she eventually leaves this bar scene, leaving Vincent's brother alone. And this man, Gasperi, kind of follows out, realizing that, taking in the information that these two used to be friends, and that maybe Morel could actually answer a couple questions for him, whether her friend Vincent had actually talked about the situation that happened in the video. And while Morel doesn't really have any answers, she tells him that she only knew her for a brief period of time in her adulthood, and that she never really knew her around the time that this video was actually taking place. And while this doesn't really give the information that Gasperi is looking for, Morel and him are kind of sitting out on the street, and Morel realizes that she has actually seen this man, and this actually kind of strikes fear into her heart, that she has actually seen this man at the same age, in the same clothes, and actually knew his name. She's actually seen him in her own childhood, in a moment with her sister, in a late winter night a long time ago, where they had actually stumbled underneath this overpass, where tragically they came across 2 dead bodies on the floor, bleeding everywhere all over the snow, and she knows for a fact that she's seen this man as he was hovering over them, holding a gun in the air. And that through this situation, that Gasperi actually mentioned her name. He says Morel out loud, and she has no idea how this man could possibly be here, but she knows for a fact that she has seen him before, and she tells this man exactly that she has seen him before. And he is kind of flabbergasted. He doesn't really know what she's talking about. He kind of tells her that he never knew her name until now, and she inevitably doesn't really believe him. But with this realization, Morel gets up, and she kind of speed walks away, getting in a taxi, trying to get as far away as possible. And there is another section of this book that will kind of happen that I think we can kind of just glance over. This is something that maybe you should read yourself. We're just kind of cover the main overarching idea. But with this is kind of the ending of the second chapter. And with the next one, we will be going all the way to 2200, out in the future, to a place and time that we've never really seen. And this chapter is going to kind of cover an author who actually writes books about pandemics and all these different earth-ending events, and a woman who is slowly starting to become very famous. Her name is Oliver, and she is on a book tour about her newest book about a pandemic kind of taking over the entire earth. And while simultaneously, a small pandemic is kind of happening out in Australia that is said to be contained, but is slowly kind of worrying the entire world around them. While most people don't really think that this is kind of a big deal, they've heard the news reports, they know that it's all still kind of just stuck in Australia. Olive is somebody that is well versed in the pandemics that have happened across the entire planet. And basically through this chapter, we will just be following Olive herself, just kind of going to all these different book tours, giving all these different lectures, all these things that are kind of becoming very tiresome for her. She just kind of misses her husband, Dion, and her little daughter, Sylvie, but she realizes that a day job would be much harder than kind of writing books and living the time of her life, getting to travel all over the planet. And I didn't really mention, but she is actually from the moon. We are way in the future, and she's from a colony called Colony 2, the second settlers on the moon of this city. And this will kind of come across later in in the story when we go yet another 200 years into the future, as well as the impact that her book has kind of made across humanity. This is a very widespread book, and essentially one of the bigger plot points of this, as this chapter, like I said, is mostly about just kind of following her through all these different interviews and how sick and tired she is of the weird kind of media that just wants to make everything fun and loosey-goosey and kind of sexual, and how she's always been a shy person, and that all these faces that are coming across are just so tiring. But one night when she's just kind of sitting in her hotel room kind of talking to her husband, he mentions something to her that is very shocking to him. This man is actually an architect, Dion, and he essentially tells her that this is highly classified, that he had actually signed something that is very ironclad that could get him into a lot of trouble, but he needs to kind of talk about this anyways. He's working on a building called the Time Institute, and while that alone doesn't really bother him, he says that there's buildings that are kind of labeled all sorts of different things that would kind of seem shocking to the normal human, but the weird thing about this is that it actually has tunnels going underneath it to a different university, as well as a government building, as well as a police headquarters, and that essentially all these buildings are actually one building, that there's so many different catacombs underneath kind of reaching out to each other that he doesn't really understand why they would need to be connected to the police headquarters as well as the government building next to them. And this is going to be another part in the book that kind of leads on into the future, something very huge, I might say. And for the rest of this chapter, I would really say just kind of read it for yourself. Once again, we're just kind of going through all the different plot points, and we are going to ascend into the sky another 200 years to 2400, where we'll meet our main protagonist, Zoe, and a man named Gasberry. And while Gasberry doesn't necessarily know a ton about his sister, this is a man who's kind of spent his life in idle. He's a little bit like Andrew in the fact that he's just been kind of floating through life, and the only thing that he can really think of is how attentive that he kind of is to things. He loves to people watch, and he's never really had anything of his own that he was super proud of. And eventually he would kind of go on to work for this hotel and kind of work as a quote-unquote detective, this man who's just kind of meant to watch the people that kind of enter the room. And once again, I did not mention this, but this is taking place on the moon itself. They are part of a newer colony that's been there for quite a long time. He's basically spent his whole life on this different moon colony. It is 2400. It's not the weirdest thing ever. I guess I'm doing a little bad at maybe describing this book in its entirety, but there's just so much going on here, and I think it's just so amazing. But anyways, he begins working for this hotel, and one day he basically goes to visit his sister. She actually works at the Time Institute, this thing that was built in 2200 by Olive's husband Dion. And by the time he gets there, she seems extremely distraught, alright? She seems to have found some sort of anomaly going on, something that they've kind of been tracking throughout history, all these different events that were written down, some things that were caught on video like in chapter 2, and she doesn't really understand. And I also forget that in chapter 3, Olive begins to kind of work her way home. She actually goes to this airport terminal where she kind of crosses this man playing violin, and she eventually does get on her ship. But for a brief moment, her vision cuts to black and she kind of hears birds chirping. She hears the rustling of trees, a forest around her, something that she can't quite see. Yet another person that is kind of blacked out in these weird areas of the earth where it would seem to be that something almost paranormal is going on. But now that I've mentioned that, this is exactly what Zoe is going to be telling Gasberry about, that there's these weird anomalies going on, and that they kind of need to figure out where exactly this location is, and how many people have actually been affected by this, that this could actually be leading to something that might change the entire future. And like I said, if you want to read this book with a fresh mind, do not continue this, as I'm about to kind of spoil the overarching plot point of this entire thing. This is where things are going to start getting a little bit crazy, but essentially, as we're about to fast track this process, as I'm doing a terrible job at covering this book, is that Zoe is telling Gasberry that there could essentially either be some sort of tear in reality, or that maybe possibly life as we know it is actually some sort of simulation. And this is a part in the book that I was just so blown apart, that all these different lives through all these different generations, these people kind of having the same exact experience, either kind of blacking out and hearing either a forest or hearing this strange violin as well as this giant whooshing noise, would eventually be known to be the airport terminal from 2200. And this is basically something that also blows Gasberry's mind. And through the rest of the story will be Gasberry trying to work with the Time Institute. He's really interested in this. Like I said, he's never really had anything that's been his. He's never really had anything that's been super that could actually make him kind of proud of himself. His sister's always been an overachiever, and of course you would think that somebody working at the Time Institute is somebody that is very accomplished, and he kind of wants this for himself. He just wants anything in his life that can kind of give him a little bit of meaning. He's a little bit like Andrew from the first chapter, where he's essentially just kind of floating on through his life. And this, I would say, would have to be the best part of the book, as we get to kind of see this Gaspard Roberts begin to work for the Time Institute. It turns out that time machines are actually real, and that a long time ago they were actually banned, and that there's only supposed to be one in existence, one that works for the Time Institute, that actually stops these anomalies from happening. And there's actually been a few people throughout history who have actually gone back in time and changed different parts of history, and it is the Time Institute's job to actually go back and rectify these things. They go back, they take these people, and what they do is they actually fix these history anomalies that have been changed, but they actually take these people and drop them into different parts of time, and they get them arrested essentially. They put them in these weird parts where they maybe get charged with a double homicide and be sent to prison in a time that is not their own, a place where they can't really talk about this weird technology from the future, where basically nobody would believe them. They would just think they're kind of crazy. And this is essentially what Gaspari, by the end of it, gets to do. He begins to become an investigator, going through all these different generations, talking to all these different people that we've met throughout the book about this weird anomaly, this weird whooshing noise, this blacking out, this strange violin that goes on. And it's just something that kind of ties together every single one of these different chapters, meaning everybody that we met before, Andrew from 1912, Morella from 2020, Olive from 2200, as he makes his way through each one of these timelines, trying to figure out what exactly these people know about this anomaly. They still don't really know where this thing took place. They don't really know where this giant maple tree in Canada is actually at, and they don't really understand how this place is actually connecting to this airport terminal in 2200. And that is essentially the overarching message of this book. I don't want to spoil everything, and I don't think I could actually do it justice if I did. So I'm gonna end the video right here, alright? I had an idea in my mind, and hopefully I've kind of given you the gist of this awesome book, The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This book that has really rang true in my mind, something that I read a year ago, and something that I've touched on once again just about a week ago. And yeah, everybody, I really highly recommend this book. If you listen to this all the way through, please read it for yourself. I did not do this thing justice whatsoever. There's so much going on, and the character development throughout the entire thing is very good, alright? I sped through so much of this. There's a lot of other plot points that are very interesting. How Gaspari Roberts actually meets all these people. He had kind of interties with Olive. He actually maybe lets her know of something that is going to happen to her in the near future, and maybe this is how he kind of becomes in the wrong with the Time Institute. And the ending of this book, I think, is just very beautiful. I think everything that happens throughout this is just worth the ride throughout. I don't think you really necessarily need to build up just for the ending. I think the entire thing of this story is something that is very well done. And I gotta say, Emily St. John Mandel is somebody that I'm going to be looking forward to reading more and more. I hear she has another really good story called Station 11, where some of these characters actually intersect, and I'm very interested to see how that happens. But yes, everybody, I hope I did a fairly decent job at explaining to you how interesting that this thing is. My original camera died, so we're over here on my phone, so hopefully it looks hunky-dory. But yes, everybody, I very highly recommend this book. Go check it out. It's a fast read, and this is a channel that really appreciates good stories, I'd say. Usually we kick to the comic, the graphic novel side of things, but I think this is one that really deserves a read. So just go check that out. Thank you all so much for watching. Flabbergasted this entire thing, just flapping my jaw as fast as I possibly can. And I'll see you guys on the next episode, and maybe next time we can do a book review that's a little less chaotic. I really tried to just dart through this thing. I thought I could explain it very well, and I think I did to some extent, but maybe not exactly how I'd like to. But yes, everybody, have yourself a fantastic day, and go read The Sea of Tranquility. Oh, and by the way, I'm walking back to my car, and I totally forgot, there's actually a channel that I'd really like you guys to go check out. It's one that I've been watching. It's another very small channel, and I think it's really important that we kind of bolster up these smaller channels, as I've been there. I'm still there. Thanks to you guys, I'm just the teensiest little bit bigger. And yeah, it's a channel that kind of reviews books, and I think he has a very laid-back attitude that I really appreciate. It kind of reminds me of when I very first started this channel, and I would just kind of sit down in my room and kind of talk about things. And yeah, I think he does a very good job. I think he covers some very interesting books. Like I said, on this channel, we usually cover like comic books and things like that, but this man, he seems like he knows a thing or two about actual books, all right, about actually reading these awesome novels and things like that. And that channel would be called The Thrill of Becoming by Remington Lewis. He just started, I think, maybe a month or two ago, but I've really been enjoying his videos. I've really been enjoying his takes. I gotta say, his 1984 take, it triggered me a little bit. That's one of my all-time favorites for sure, but I do see where he's coming from, and I think you guys should all check that out. So I'm gonna post that down in the description. Go check out his channel, and yeah, go talk to him in his comments. I think that would be very cool. Like I said, it's really important that we kind of check out these smaller channels on YouTube, because it is so extremely hard to grow on this platform unless you're just constantly posting and you already have the social media and things like that to do so. So yes, The Art of Becoming with Remington Lewis, I think, is an awesome little channel, and I'm very excited to see how far this guy goes. So go check him out. If you're watching this, Remington Lewis, thank you for watching me ramble through this book, and I very much appreciate your takes on things. So yes, fair sales to you, my friend, and I hope you do good, and I hope you get some good comments and kind of meet some cool people. YouTube is a very fun thing to do, and yeah, I think you got it. So just continue on from Michigan. Have yourself a fantastic day, my friend.